Welcome to the Speak Like a Leader podcast with John Bates. Welcome to the show. With me today is someone that I am just beyond excited to talk with. And, it's not always usual that people's names really speak what they are, but today, my guest name really says what he is. Today, Julian Treasure is joining me on the show, and he really is a treasure. He is a sound and communication expert with 5 TED Talks, 12 TEDx Talks, and 150 million combined views. He's got 2 books. One is called Sound Business, which is about the sounds that business makes. We're going to talk about that. And the other one is How to Be Heard, which actually, interestingly, and maybe, fittingly, won the best business audiobook of 2018. And he works both with companies about sound that they make and how they listen. And he also works with individuals to help them listen and speak more effectively. And as somebody who is in kind of a related field, I have to say, this guy is magic. You are going to want to listen to every word he says. And this is going to be a fabulous conversation. Julian, I am so glad to have you, if it's not obvious already.
I feel very daunted now, John, by that introduction. I hope I can live up to it.
Well, I think you just be you and it'll be fine. And you also have another book called The Wonder of Sound, which you're working on, but it's coming out in a little while. So that's just to let people know they should keep their eyes on you. And Julian, where's the best place for people to find you? It's Julian Treasure, is that right?
Yes, juliantreasure.com is my website, or my company is thesoundagency.com. Okay,
The Sound Agency. And it's Julian Treasure, TREASURE.com.
Perfect.
Yep, great.
That's it. So
you can go find him if you want to. We'll put that in the show notes, obviously. But Julian, thanks very, very much for joining me. I think like many people, I probably found you the first time because of your talk, How to Speak so that people want to listen. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So
absolutely, yes. That was the 5th TED Talk, and it's the one that went completely ballistic. I think it's the 6th most viewed TED Talk of all time now, amazingly.
Yeah, which is, boy, congratulations to you. That is, and listen, that doesn't happen unless you've said something really worth sharing, because TED is all about ideas worth spreading. And when people hear an idea like yours, they want to spread it. And that's why these things go viral. And I guess I'm looking at it right now, 51 million views. Wow.
Yeah, and that's on
so
TED.com. Chris always says you have to double that number to get an estimate of the views across the internet because of embedding and podcasts and, links and
yes,
so forth.
and YouTube and all that stuff. Well, so that's fabulous. So let's just start with kind of your, bring us into your world, Julian. Here we are, we've got people listening who are founders and CEOs of startup companies. We've got top leaders at large global organizations. We've got a lot of people who are leaders at various levels. Walk us into your basic thesis about sound and what you talk about.
Fundamentally, we've become immensely ocular over the years. We've been using complex language for perhaps 150,000 years as a species. Writing was invented only about 5,000 years ago, maybe less. And yet, if you think about the way we communicate these days, it so much involves looking down, using your fingers, using your eyes, text-based communication. All of the innovations that we've come up with in the last 30 or 40 years have been that way of communicating, screens. words on
Yeah.
screens, possibly pictures and so forth. So my proposition really is that we've lost contact with our ears to a degree. Once upon a time, if you were in a cave, say 50,000 years ago, you had to listen very carefully. Hearing is our primary warning
Yes,
sense
you
because
did.
you can hear things behind you. You can't see
Yeah.
things behind you. So if you're sharing a cave with some bears or a tiger or something, you better be listening. Um, we've lost contact with that. It's very rare now that we're listening in that attentive, intense way. Possibly musicians. You can't be a great musician if you're not listening to all of the other players in the group or the band or the orchestra or whatever. But
Yeah.
a lot of the time we go around really dead to the oral
Mm.
world around us. And that's a shame because it's a really important dimension. It affects us. When that's the key thing, John, sound affects us profoundly. It affects our bodies. If you have to work in
Yeah.
an environment that's noisy, and I'm not talking about shouting noisy, just speaking loudly noisy. If you're in that day after day,
Mm-hmm.
like take, for example, a teacher in a noisy classroom day after day, it increases
Yeah.
your risk of heart attack. It shortens your
Oh,
life, probably. So it affects us physiologically. A sudden noise will change your heart rate, your breathing, your hormone secretions. It affects us emotionally. Think of the power of music to illustrate that.
yeah.
It affects our cognition, how well we can think. And this is a little known stat that many of the listeners to this episode probably won't have come across. We're open planning the entire world. There's like 6 billion square feet of open plan office now in the world. Open plan is a disaster for concentration. It's fine for collaboration, but that's not the only kind of work we do. Open plan really pollutes the world around you with other people's conversation, which is the most distracting sound in the world. So the stats show that we can be something in the region of 1/3 as productive in a noisy office as we would be in a quieter space. So we're losing 2/3 of our productivity that way. And finally, sound affects our behavior. What we do, how fast we move, what we buy in a store, all sorts of behaviors are changed by the sound around us. So really, my proposition is it's important that we start listening, and it's important also that we start to consider our speaking in a more active way. And really, this comes back to school. We teach reading and writing in schools. It's a scandal if a child leaves school unable to read or write, isn't it? And yet, we
Yeah.
barely teach listening or speaking. I mean, more in your country than
Mm.
mine. I know you do public speaking a bit. But listening, how many schools have a curriculum for listening? None.
Yeah.
And these fundamental skills, which affect every aspect of our life, are left to us to develop. Listening is a skill, not a capability. Hearing is a capability. Listening is a skill that we can master
Mm.
and that has huge implications. And speaking, similarly. I mean, I've often spoken, as you have, I'm sure many times, to a room full of senior managers or CEOs, thousands of them. I say, how many of you have to use your voice in important ways? You give presentations, you're selling things and so forth. Everybody's hand goes up. Okay. How
Yeah.
many of you have had formal vocal training? 6 or 7. It's
Yeah.
amazing to me that, we
Yeah.
take for granted this incredible instrument, which the human voice is. It's a beautiful instrument. And we
Mm.
just assume we're going to pick up how to play it and get on and muddle by. So that, in a nutshell, is what I'm all about. It's about consciousness of sound. It's about listening in a conscious way and speaking powerfully and effectively in a conscious way.
Well, yeah, it's really interesting to hear you put it that way because it makes me so grateful for some of the things that happened as I was growing up, Julian. And when I was in high school, I took debate. And I didn't actually know it was debate. It was called forensics. And the only reason I took forensics is because Joni Babelis, the most beautiful girl in 8th grade, was taking forensics. So my best friend and I wanted to be in the same class as her. So we took forensics, and it turns out that's debate. And I had a really, really absolutely amazing coach in high school and learned so much from him. And because he was just absolutely, totally mad, just an absolutely crazy guy who loved us and would do anything for us, I did anything for him. So I totally by accident had a great coach, and I was coachable in high school around public speaking. And then I did something that I always felt bad for up until just recently. And hearing you say this reminds me that I don't need to feel bad. But I actually dropped out of college to run away with my rock band. I was the lead singer in a rock band, and we were going to go make it big in California. That actually didn't happen. But, I sang in a rock band for a total of about 5 years, dropped out of school for a total of about 3, but finally went back, after the band broke up and everybody went home. I went back to school, and I was at UCLA, got involved in the internet, and that became my career. And I always felt like I was kind of a naughty boy for doing that. But what I've been realizing over the last decade plus of doing what I do, I think is mirrored in what you're saying. That time singing in a rock band and having to listen to be a part of making music and just using my voice and things, I think that ended up being probably the number one skill that I brought to all of my business endeavors, period.
I think it's incredibly important. I've been a drummer since I was 12, played in bands.
Okay.
And, the same thing applies really. Even though drummers make a lot of noise, you can't be a good player if you're not really attentively listening. And it's a multi-track listening. You're listening to everybody else at the same time, all the other instruments, all the other players. And I think that's a habit that stays with musicians. I mean, I did see a study once that said musicians have slightly larger brains than non-musicians because they develop this area of the brain that specializes in that kind of listening. But I do think it has shaped my life, definitely, that attention to music. And it's really why I formed the sound agency back in 2003 when I had a magazine business before that, and I sold it. And I've had all these years working with marketeers and understanding brands and how they communicate. And at the same time, in the evenings, I was playing music. And I was desperate to do something that brought the two halves of me together, the listening and the understanding of brands and marketing. So that's what caused the sound agency to be born, and to start asking the question, how does your brand sound? Which many of them have never thought about. So I absolutely agree with you. I think music is a great access. Anybody who plays, I mean, it's now known to be very good for you to play. But even if you don't play, if you're listening and paying attention, I do find it. I mean, it disturbs me a bit that with streaming and with headphones and with the way that we tend to consume music now, it's becoming more of a background noise. And that to me is a bit sad. Music was never designed to be a background sound. It's so often misapplied in public places. There are a lot of people who hate background music in restaurants, in shops and so forth. It's kind of imposing a sound on somebody. And of course, one person's favorite track is another person's horrible noise. So it's very difficult to get it right.
That reminds me of a question that I would love to ask you. We're going in that direction, so I'll just ask now. I often find that people's superpower is located right next to their scar. And I wonder if that brings up anything for you, this superpower around music and understanding sound and the power of listening. Was there ever a time when you had, a failure or something that went wrong, a mess somewhere that had you get more present to this?
Well, I've had lots of those in my life, and I think at the core of them for a long time was arrogance. I went to what we call in the UK a public school, which is actually a private school. I don't know why we call them
Uh,
public schools, but we do. So I went to one of the best
uh,
schools in the UK. And this place is a hothouse. And it turns out, politicians and superstars in all sorts of fields. It's very competitive. It's very elitist. It's very driven. And it tends to eject people out the other end who are extremely conceited, would be an unkind way of putting it. Convinced that they're right would be
yeah.
perhaps more balanced. And in my trainings, I talk a lot about the the desire to be right and how damaging
Mm,
that is in the modern world. You only have to look at the polarization of politics, about silos of extreme views on the internet, of all sorts of demonization of people and violence and disrespect and so forth, which comes a lot from this desire to be right. There's
yes.
a lovely phrase from the therapist and author Harville Hendricks, an American who I respect a great deal, who said, "You can either be right or be in a relationship." And I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
truth in that. So I came out of this school very convinced that I was right about most things. And that degree of arrogance has, over the years, it caused me a lot of pain. I, crashed and burned in various directions. I made mistakes, which cost me huge amounts of money, friendships.
Mm,
And I guess sometime around the late 90s, it kind of came to a head. I was running a business and very convinced I was right. And I just kind of had a total meltdown. And from that point onwards, I've really started to respect the skill of listening to other people with compassion, with curiosity, not seeing everybody as, oh, I know what they're about to say, but judging books by covers and so forth, but actually seeing each person that I encounter as an opportunity to learn. Now, it may be an
mm.
opportunity to learn how not to do something. Quite often it is.
Yeah.
I'm not saying we're going to ape everybody, but I am saying that, there's always something to learn from listening to other human beings, whether you're managing them or working with them, working for them, or they're in your family or friends. So it's
Mm,
a humility, really, would be the word. I think listening requires a good degree of humility in order to be open and not think you know everything, not be one of those people who always has to be bigger, better, best, or interrupts people the whole time, overrides people, has to show off, wants to be right, wants to be respected. Um,
yeah.
you know, as any great speaker coach will tell you, the moment you walk on stage, it's not about you, never about you. It's
Right.
about the gift you're giving to the audience, and it's about your relationship with them. And so I guess that's what happened to me. I discovered the importance of humility and that listening is a compassionate, caring skill that puts you in an incredibly strong position in life if you actually start to apply it. I've got another book cooking in due course, which will be around the idea of listening leadership. Of how can anybody be a great leader if they're dogmatic, overriding, arrogant, right all the time? I mean, if you are right all the time, it can work, I guess. I know there are stories
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
Steve Jobs that he was a bit that way, and that
Yeah.
actually he was right. So,
Mm,
sometimes a despot can be incredibly effective. But for most of us, we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to be right all the time. And therefore, it's incredibly
mm,
important to be open to challenge, to be open to new ideas, to be open to antithesis to our thesis. And that out of that comes synthesis and a greater understanding. So, yeah, I guess in a nutshell, that's what happened with me, and that's ever since then I've been really dedicated to listening.
I think that's fabulous. And I think that I always feel like we, as human beings, we kind of know these things, but we don't know we know them. And what I mean is, when I hear your story, I can so easily believe that because you're clearly driven and you're clearly committed to excellence, and you have this real sharp edge about you that is now of service. I could see how that could be really dangerous if what you were most focused on, Julian, was being right. It could be very scary to be around you if that was your driving motivator. But the fact that you had that meltdown and you got that understanding of just the power and the importance of humility, and that listening comes from being humble, that I think it's really clear to me that was the thing. Like that. Thank you for sharing that, because it's something that I think shows in your talks and just how you show up. So I think it's, as much as that was probably a drag to go through that moment, I think it was good for you and good for the world that you did.
Well, thank you. And I don't know about the world, but it certainly was good for me, and I can commend it because I do think being right is one of the great ills of our modern age. And you only have to look at Mr. Putin to see what happens if you surround yourself with a bunch of people who agree with everything you say, never challenge. You can start to be in a very alternative reality. And I have known and suffered in organizations that are like that because they have a CEO who is absolutely, phenomenally aggressive, right, and needs to be in control of everything and won't accept bad news, shoots the messenger. And then what happens is you stop hearing the bad news, and you need to know the bad news because it can be fatal. So, listening, I think, is really important for us. Both, if you think of a squirrel, it's a great analogy. Squirrel is fast, it's athletic, it's a dynamic little thing, but it's quite vulnerable. And the biggest thing it does to keep itself safe is it's attentive. It's listening all the time. It won't look down for more than half a second before it's up and listening all around it. It's listening for danger, first of all, and it's listening for food or opportunities, perhaps, as well. So those things are, they're around us all the time. Organizations have these opportunities, and we have to be alert to them. And that's why constant listening is incredibly important.
So, but what I was going to say is I totally, that was exactly who I was thinking about, because as you and I are talking, Julian, Russia is attacking Ukraine and continues to just be bested by a country that's much smaller, much less, well armed, all that stuff. And I think that it's exactly down to what you said. Putin has just removed anybody who would tell him the truth. He has been so committed to quote unquote being right that he's removed anybody that would keep him in touch with actual reality in any way. And I think about that all the time when I think about leaders in these organizations that I support. And one of the things that I think is important to say about that is that a lot of times these leaders are not necessarily super evil like Vladimir Putin. They may just be really charismatic, and the problem with that is when you're a very charismatic leader, nobody wants to give you bad news because they just don't want to make you unhappy. And I just wrote, I do a weekly mini training that I send out. And very recently I wrote one about how teams, especially charismatic teams, thrive on truth telling. And to loop it back to what you and I have been talking about, that truth telling is not going to happen in an environment unless the leader is actively listening and rewarding that truth telling.
Yes, I mean, communication is a circle, and people often misinterpret it as a line. And this is kind of at the heart of my work. I think speaking and listening are involved with each other in a circular relationship. The way I speak affects the way you listen, and the way you listen affects the way I speak, and on and on. You know, the way I listen affects the way you speak, and so on and so forth. It's a dynamic. It's happening all the time. So it's not simply I speak, you listen. There's an interrelationship which changes through time. And one of the key things I talk about in powerful speaking, which, you know, leaders need just as much as they need conscious listening, is the consciousness that you always speak into a listening. Whether it's one person or 1,000, that person has a listening which is unique to them or those people. And the reason for that is that we listen through a set of filters that we develop over our entire lives. So yours are different from mine, John. You were born into a different culture. We speak a very similar language, but not entirely the same. And then along the way, we've accreted values, attitudes, and beliefs from parents, role models, friends, teachers, whoever it might be. We pick some up, we put others away. You've got different ones from mine. And then in any given situation, we might have intentions, expectations, we might have emotions going on, we might have assumptions about what this is all about or what somebody's thinking about us. There's all these things create listening filters, and that's what we listen through. You don't listen to everything. Listening is making meaning from sound. You select certain things to pay attention to, and then you make them mean something. Now, the biggest mistake I come across in speaking is people assuming everybody listens like I do. They don't. And if you start to ask the question, what's the listening I'm speaking into? Then you have a very strong chance of being much more effective, because it may be a completely different listening to yours. Just, I mean, as a simple example, and most salespeople or people who have to speak and influence will know this. If somebody's a very, very slow speaker and you come in and you're talking like this, it's really exciting opportunity, you've lost them immediately because there's a complete disconnect. So there's a matching, mirroring, all those kind of techniques which people teach. They're there for a reason. And to me, it's a much simpler question. What's the listening I'm speaking into? And then I can become conscious of that, kind to it, and adapt to it. So that is really fundamental. I think that listening is all around us all the time. It's not just me listening well, it's me being conscious of the listenings I'm speaking into, which a lot of the time probably aren't people listening very well. And you'll know this. I mean, any speaker will know this. Listening changes over time. Not only from one person to the next is it different, but it's different over time. So you and I probably will often get given the graveyard slot just after lunch. He's a good speaker.
I was
He's
just
a pro.
thinking about
that.
I was
with that.
just yeah. That's so funny.
So, yeah, it changes, doesn't it? That's when everybody's blood has gone to the gut. They're feeling a bit sleepy, and it's a completely different experience speaking at that moment to speaking at 9:30 in the morning, or indeed at 5 p.m. when everybody wants to go home and they really want to get out of there. So listening changes through the day. Everybody's listening changes. You know, your listening will be completely different if you've just had amazing news to if you've just had terrible news. So our emotions change, our listening changes, and it's really important not to be wrapped up in my end of the conversation, but to be asking all the time, what's the listening I'm speaking into?
I mean, I just want to reiterate what you're saying. I think two big things. First is just the concept of there being a listening, right? That's something that I don't think, I mean, I certainly never thought of that till someone pointed it out to me, but there is a listening. There is always a listening you're speaking into. And we never get taught that in school. We don't talk about it in typical conversation, but just to be aware of the fact that there could be something called a listening, that you're speaking into, that's already, I think, next level ninja stuff. And then to actually ask the question, what is the listening I'm speaking into right now? Or right now? Or with this person? Or with that group? That question will absolutely fundamentally alter what you say. I think your word choice, your intonation, the level of all of that stuff. And one of the things that I talk about in my training, Julian, is how I used to be so excited about checking the box, I told you so. I was responsible for what I said, and boy, I told you so. But checking the box, I told you so, was not giving me the results I wanted. It was giving me this wonderful thing that I thought was so great of being able to say, I told you so, but I wasn't getting what I wanted. And at a certain point, I realized I could actually go another step. I could, instead of just being responsible for what I said, I could actually be responsible for what you heard. And I started approaching my communication from the point of view of how can I be responsible for checking the box? I landed it over there.
Yes.
And that was a whole different world.
Net, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Different world. You have to get the ball over the net, and it doesn't matter how, your footwork is on this side of the net and how great you look and, how elegant the stroke is. If it hits the net,
absolutely.
It hits the net. So I agree with that.
That's such a great analogy. I love. Well, so Julian, we've still got a few minutes. So I want to ask this question earlier than I usually do, just because I want to give us time to hear anything that you might want to say. Is there anything that I haven't asked you about, or is there anything, that you think's like another direction that you'd like to take us in? Because I'm, as you know, I'm a fan of your work, and I would love to just hear anything that that's still over there with you for this call.
Well, I think the important things to me are to understand that listening is a skill, not a capability. So that's something we can practice, master, and get really good at. And so that's something for everybody listening to this to take on. Second, if you build on a foundation of good listening, which has got certain aspects to it, and I do that in my trainings and my courses and my book and so forth, you can become an expert listener. Then if you put on top of that powerful speaking, so you're aware of the listening you're speaking into. Powerful speaking, of course, is about what you say and how you say it as well. And that is a fundamental skill which you train people on all the time, John. I know it's an incredibly important skill. To me, there are 4 foundations to that skill. And I think it's worth just mentioning those. They form a word, an acronym, which I love acronyms because I have a terrible memory. So the acronym here is HAIL. HAIL, to greet or acclaim enthusiastically. The H stands for honesty. That is being clear and being straight in what you say. Not trying to be clever, not trying to dominate people, overwhelm them with jargon or, impress them. It's about just getting the ball over the net, as we just said, being clear and straight and obviously truthful in what you say. Now, not always, because unbridled honesty is not necessarily the right thing. My goodness, you're looking terrible today. Well, it's not very kind. It's not necessary. So it has to be tempered, and we'll come on to what tempers it in a moment. So honesty. The A is authenticity, and that is being yourself. I've seen so many people who go onto a stage and they pretend to be some sort of, ninja, loud, aggressive, fast-talking, charismatic person when they're not. Well, I do
Yeah.
urge anybody to have a look at Susan Cain's lovely TED talk about the power of introverts, the importance
Here,
of
here.
introverts in life and in business as well. We don't have to be loud and aggressive to be successful. So just being yourself, it's so much easier than pretending to be somebody else. The I is integrity. If you say it, it happens. Being your word, having integrity in that you're not writing checks you can't cash, you're not making promises you can't keep. If you don't have integrity, your words evaporate like puddles in the sun very quickly. So
Yeah.
integrity, very important. And finally, the L of Hale is the thing that tempers the honesty. It's love, by which I don't mean romantic love, I mean wishing people well. And there's an amazing exercise that an old friend of mine called Charlie told me years ago, pretty much when I had my kind of just after my meltdown, and I was engaged in this search for humility. And you know that a lot of people, and I, including what I used to do, we walk around thinking bad things about people. Get out of my way, you idiot! Rude things in our head about people around us.
Yeah.
And he taught me a great practice, which is instead of doing that, to say the words in your head, not out loud, to say the words bless you or I wish you well. Every time you come across somebody, bless you, I wish you well. Walking on stage to an audience, I wish you well. It makes life so much lighter. And you may find that if you meet people's eye when you're doing that, you smile at each other as opposed
Mm.
to when you're thinking out of my way, you idiot. You meet somebody's eye and you look away because they might spot what you were thinking. So there's a connection that's forged when you're wishing people well. Obviously not when they do you harm, but just as a rule, it's a great way to be. So love, that kind of simple well wishing, is a great way to speak, and it's a great temper for the honesty as well. So honesty with love means you don't have to say that rather unkind thing, even if it's true. You can be kind as well as honest. So hail the four
Yeah.
foundations to me of powerful speaking.
Boy, I love that. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's beautiful, and I completely concur for whatever it's worth. And I I yeah, I love it. I had a question and then it slipped away. Um, but what a great thing Charlie taught you. I do a lot of travel, as I suppose you do, and
Mm,
I do find myself sometimes getting into that position where I'm looking at someone and resenting them for whatever reason.
mm,
They're
mm-hmm.
trying to cut in line in front of me or they're whatever. And I mean, none of it ever really matters. So I'm getting on a plane in just a few hours after we record this, and I am going to take the bless you, I wish you well exercise with me. So thank you, Julian, and thank you, Charlie. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Charlie. Yes, you'll find I find when I'm doing that, it feels like I'm walking a foot above the ground, and it's a lighter existence. So it's a very good thing
Yeah.
to try.
Well, so I just really appreciate you taking the time with me, Julian. That was the thing that I was going to say. You were kind enough to give us a discount on your course. And I would be remiss if I didn't mention that here. We will definitely have that in the show notes. Do you want to tell us just a little bit about that? Because I want to make that available to people. I think that, uh, you know, it's very generous of you. And I think a lot of our listeners may want to take advantage of that.
Yes, I mean it's not often that I'm talking to an audience with you, to an audience of people who are absolutely focused on speaking better. I mean that's what it's all about. Very often I'm on stage and
Mm.
people are going, "What's he talking about?" And if you're not aware that you're not listening and that your voice has got so much more to offer, then you're in the not knowing what you don't know level. And
Yes.
so I think your audience is going to be, at the very least, knowing what they don't know, if not consciously um, competent and working on it. So, yes, it's my pleasure. I've got an online course which distills most of what I know, really, into about 7.5 hours of video material. It's 9 chapters. It's got a whole chapter on public speaking, which I'm sure you'll be very familiar with everything in there, John. But it's my everything I've learned from all those TED Talks and hundreds of
Yeah.
times on stage. But it's also got lots in it about listening skills and about speaking skills, where we go wrong, the pitfalls to avoid, and so forth. So it's a big course. And yes, we are very happy in this instance to give your audience, because they're committed, a discount of 50% on the course. So it's just half price for lifetime access. So yes, I mean, it'd be great if you put that in the show notes. We'd welcome anybody who wants to take us up on that offer. And I hope it really transforms your happiness, effectiveness, and well-being, which are the 3 things I think which are at stake here with how well we listen and how well we speak.
Well, and what I will say is, I have my own online course, Julian, and a lot of times people resist online courses, but having watched your TED Talks, I think spending 7.5 hours with you on video would be exquisite. So, and that's that's not something that I would say easily. So I appreciate you offering that to us, and I would encourage people to check that out. I think that it's going to be a fabulous, fabulous experience.
Thank you.
So, Julian, anything else that you'd like to say before we wrap up?
I think that the consciousness is, to me, what this is all about, John, and I'm sure you're familiar with that as well. I mean, for example, I love speaking on stage because it's the time in my life when I'm most conscious. You've got 1,000 eyes looking at you. And so you better be conscious of every gesture, of how you're standing, of how you're breathing, of what you're saying, of how you're saying it, of how you're connecting, of what's going on, that dynamic in the room. And I love that feeling of being fully present. So to me, speaking and listening, they are aspects of consciousness, very important aspects, because we experience the world in 5 senses, not just one. We don't just see it, we hear it, we smell it, we taste it, we touch it. But sound is, I think, so ignored, and it really is like opening a door to a new dimension. If you start to move into this conscious listening, powerful conscious speaking, a new relationship with sound, to me, it's like turning up the color on a monochrome picture. It is a wonderful thing, and I really commend it to everybody listening to this. I hope you have lots of fun with it.
One of the things I noticed, Julian, when I spent about more than 10 years just getting really coached in conscious listening, and it was by a very rigorous coach who was, as my dad would say, kicking my butt up around my ears, And what I realized as I took on conscious listening, really being conscious and really, really listening, people got so much more interesting.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't think they changed.
Absolutely true, John. And the other thing they'll become more interested as well.
Yes.
Because if you find people are not listening to you, start listening to them, and they'll feel more engaged, and they'll share more things, and you'll have more to talk about, and they'll be more interested in what you've got to say as well. So that old circle is going on all the time.
It's fabulous. Well, listen, I see we're coming up on our time, and I want to respect what I told you. I would love to talk to you all day. And I do hope, I'm just going to say this out loud, and maybe somehow the universe will make it happen. I would love to sit down and have dinner with you, Julian. I think it would be just so great to meet you and just get to be face to face with you for a few minutes. And I wish you all the success in the world. I mean, you're doing super well. I just want your message to get out there further and further. It's one of the reasons I'm so excited to have you here, to share you with, everyone that I can reach. And thank you so much for joining us. I'm I'm a big fan.
Well, thank you, John. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's lovely to speak to somebody who really cares about this as much as I do, and it's quite rare. So I've really enjoyed our conversation, and I'm sure the universe will conspire to put us in the same place at the same time at some point in the future, and I look forward to that very much as well.
Likewise. All right. Well, so thank you for joining us here on Speak Like a Leader Show. I think you can see why I am so excited that Julian was willing to join us. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star rating and tell some of your friends about it. We'd love to get people like Julian and the other guests that we have on here out to a wider audience, because I think you can see the difference it makes. And Julian, thank you one more time very, very much for making time in your busy schedule to join us. It's been an absolute pleasure for me as well. I love talking to somebody else who cares about this as much as I do too. So thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank all of you for joining us here on Speak Like a Leader Show. We'll see you next time, and we all wish you the best, Julian. Thanks again.
Thank you, John.
Thank you for joining the Speak Like a Leader podcast. Go be awesome.